My guest today is Forrest Fenn, a well-known gallery owner and author. He is the author of 10 books of memoir, history, art, and archaeology. A lot of people may not know that before he opened his gallery in Santa Fe in 1972, he had a whole different career of 20 years as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and we'll find out about all kinds of things we didn't know about Forrest. One of the most interviewed men in town, and we'll see if I can come up with something a little different. For his books of memoir, Forrest mined the depths of his adventurous life. Most of us think of our lives as not particularly extraordinary, but Fenn shows us that there is drama and passion and surprise in our lives if we look and just write down some details and follow the narrative. Here is some of his raw material. He is from a real Texas upbringing with a family steeped in Texas and family life. He bypassed college and signed up for the Air Force during the Korean War. And during that 20-year career, he was shot down twice over Vietnam. After retiring from the Air Force, Fenn and his wife Peg and 2 daughters looked around Lubbock. It was flat, it was windy, it was dusty, and apparently it was Peg who said it was time to get out and move to the mountains in New Mexico. And that's when they started the now famous Fenn Gallery. Welcome, Forrest.
Well, thank you.
I think you said to me once that you wrote your memoirs actually for your children, for your 2 daughters.
Well, that's true. I was shocked about maybe 15 years ago. My daughters now are 55 and 54, and I learned that they didn't know who Clark Gable was. And it shocked me, and I told myself, I want them to know who their family was. And so I decided I wasn't thinking about a memoir, just a history of my family. So I got a yellow pad and a pencil, and I started writing, and I did this for a few years. I didn't have a computer, but I talked about my grandmother telling me when I was a little kid about the Indians running through her barnyard in Fort Worth trying to catch chickens, the Kiowas and Comanches, and I talked about my parents making soap out in the backyard. My father made his own lye. Most people don't know how you make lye, but my father made his own lye. He killed his own pigs, and we made soap and poured it out in a big flat container. And all the neighbors came over with a knife and cut a couple of bars of soap. I mean, that's the way we were doing things in the 1930s and early 1940s before World War II.
And your book, which is called The Thrill of the Chase, a memoir, is really quite colorful in that the layout, and you have wonderful old photographs. And they are family photographs, and we do get to see Forrest Fenn as a very young man, but it really gives a sense of place and a sense of the time.
Well, I remember what I wanted to teach my daughters was everything that I could remember that I'm sure that they didn't know about. And I remember my first recollection, I think, was when I must have been about 2 years old. I couldn't get up on a little stool that was about six or 8 inches high. My father lifted me up and put me on that stool. And that I think is my earliest recollection. But it took me, I think my memoir has 28,800 words in it, and every one of them is something that I wanted my kids and grandkids to know about my side of their family.
Well, and some of it is pretty adventurous. I mean, I love the chapter you have about when you were 16 and you went on a big adventure with your friend Donnie. You rented 2 horses and took off.
Well, we were in the Gallatin National Forest out of West Yellowstone, Montana. Our excuse was we were going to go look for Lewis and Clark because we were going up the mountains almost exactly where they were, and we got up there and we got lost and we spent 4, 5, 6 days up in there. It was a wonderful adventure. And when we decided to go home, we didn't know where home was, so it took us a couple of days to solve that problem. But it was a great adventure.
Well, and your book, actually, in that chapter, has some advice for would-be adventurers, what you learned on that trip, and just a couple of things. You have a list here. Hunger is not a good thing. Oh, it's one thing, but you can't hide from thunderstorms. Porcupine meat tastes like kerosene. Coffee made by boiling pine needles can bring on cardiac arrest. There's a whole list here of amusing things that you learned at the tender age of 16.
Experience is the best teacher.
Yeah. How did you get from writing on a yellow pad to actually deciding to do a book and accomplishing that?
Well, I started writing on a yellow pad with a pencil, and when I'd make a mistake, I would erase it and try to fill in. I didn't know enough about writing. They'd just mark it out and you keep going. And I wrote my first book, The Beat of the Drum and the Hoop of the Dance. I drafted 85,000 words, and I think 10 or 12 rewrites later, I had 65,000 words. And that was a hard book for me. But after that, I got a computer, and, things got a lot easier.
Well, what was the book you just mentioned?
It was the biography of Joseph Henry Sharp, was the first artist to live in Taos.
And you wrote quite a few books about art in the Southwest. Why did you decide to write art books or an art history book?
Well, I had a gallery called Fenn Gallery in Santa Fe, just a couple of blocks east of the state capitol. And I learned early on that if you write a book about something, people think you're an expert in that subject. And I needed to be an expert because I wasn't making any money in the art business, and I wanted people to come buy some paintings from me. That's why I wrote my first couple of books. I wrote a little book about William R. Lee and the drawings that he made for the dioramas in the Natural History Museum in New York.
Really?
Yeah, and that was really my first book.
Why did you think to do that? And those dioramas are amazing. I grew up going to them.
I'm sorry you asked me that question, but I'll answer it. I wrote the book because I had all the drawings, the originals, and so you could almost call it a catalog. But it was to promote those drawings, and I sold all of them, and I sold some of them to the Natural History Museum in New York, and that told me that I didn't have any education. I made terrible grades in high school, but I was successful with my first book, and I said, if that's all there is to it, I can do that.
So you do a lot of research. You write a book, and you become an expert.
Well, there are people that say I'm not an expert, but I like that persona.
And you have a second memoir also. So
I wrote a second memoir. It's called Too Far to Walk. It's kind of a sequel to The Thrill of the Chase.
And where does that pick up in your life?
It's more it's a series of short stories. I talk about some of my. I've always thought that I'm the world's greatest schmoozer. When people came in my gallery, I wanted to take them to lunch. I wanted to learn everything. How did they get where they are? And I met wonderful people, from Michael Douglas to Jackie Kennedy to Robin Olds to lots of politicians, President Ford. And it's fun to sit down with people that have really made a mark with their lives. And when I was stationed in Germany, I was on my way from Bitburg, Germany to Munich, and I looked on a map and I recognized a little town just off the Autobahn, the town where Field Marshal Rommel lived. He was the Desert Fox that fought with Patton in the tank battles in North Africa. And so I stopped my car and knocked on her door, and she invited me in.
Who invited you in?
Mrs. Rommel.
Oh.
And her son Winfried was there. He spoke a little English, and we drank tea, and I stayed there for an hour and a half. She was afraid that her husband would be forgotten. He's the one that tried to kill Hitler, and Hitler made a deal with him. If you'll commit suicide, we'll take care of your family. But if you don't, we're going to kill you and your family. So Field Marshal Rommel killed himself to save his family. I don't think he was a Nazi. He was a soldier.
Right. He was in North Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like when opening your gallery, going from, I think, I can't remember if you told me this, that you go from when you first came to Santa Fe, you got your gallery, and you were sleeping on mattresses on the floor. It was a pretty rudimentary operation. And then you went from that to being the biggest gallery in town for quite a while. Your gallery is where the Nedra Matucci Gallery is right now.
That's right. I sold to Nedra. She was a good client of mine and a good friend, and she had a little gallery on Canyon Road. I made a deal with her. One of my rules that I started when I was fairly young was that I don't want to do anything for more than 15 years. My reason was there's there are too many great things to do, and there are not very many 15s. You know, I use it as an example. I walks down the street and I see attorneys, lawyers walking to work, 90-year-old attorneys. They're going to die at their desk, and they love that. And you know, but I've always said, if you don't like your job or your marriage, you should slam the door and go someplace else. That's my philosophy about that.
But you kept at it with the gallery, and you. What happened? How did you get from sleeping on the floor to quite a lovely establishment?
Well, because I had no education and I had no experience in art, I didn't own a painting when I opened my gallery. But I learned that if I'm going to compete with the big guys, then I've got to have an appearance. And I told myself, if I advertise full-page color in the prominent magazines of the day, they'll think I'm an expert. And they did. And then because I wasn't an expert, because they thought I was, then I had to go to school and research and bring myself up to speed. And so, you know, after 17 years, well, I became knowledgeable on a lot of, you know, I don't think I'm an expert on anything, but I'm knowledgeable about a few things.
I want to take a moment here, a little break, to tell our listeners that you're listening to The Last Word, Conversations with Writers. I am the host and producer, Abigail Adler, and today we are speaking with gallery owner and writer Forrest Fenn. Forrest, what kind of people have walked into your gallery? You had...
Well, you know, that was a very fortunate byproduct of owning a gallery that I did not anticipate when I got into business. But we had all kinds of politicians. John Connally, 3 times governor of Texas and Secretary of the Navy, he and I were partners in a bunch of paintings. And of course, Jackie Kennedy stayed in my guest house for a week, and President Ford stayed in my guest house, and all kinds of movie stars from Robert Redford to Cher and everybody in between. And it was a wonderful experience. Like I said, I'm a great schmoozer, and if you've done something, then I want to talk to you. I'd like to take you to lunch and find out what you're doing. You know, I'd like to spend an hour with Charles Manson, but you know, try to figure out what's ticking with that guy, if anything.
Did any of the celebrities buy some artwork? Or at least a book?
Jonathan Winters bought an expensive painting from me, and Steve Martin bought paintings from me, and Suzanne Summers bought a number of paintings from me. Robert Redford bought Eric Sloan paintings. Sure, a lot of them did.
And I do remember years ago that your gallery was also the scene of a couple of movies that were shot in town.
There was one movie, it was called And God Created Woman. Yeah, they shot that in my guest house.
Right. And Roger Vadim was in town. I remember for that.
That's right.
You had quite a collection. They had a tent right there on Paseo de Peralta for all the actors. Yeah, I remember. So why you're basically, I think all your books are self-published. Why self-publish?
Well, I hate to say that I couldn't find a real publisher because I never did try, but I had some experience with publishers. A publisher wants to save money. And they can rearrange your book. They like to put all the color photographs in one signature. And I just wanted my books to be the way I wanted them to be. If I'm talking about a painting, I want to talk about it on the same page where I picture the painting. So you don't get that when you go to a commercial publisher. So
it was important to you to have control over how the book looked.
And you know, when I write a book, I'm not but 20% there because I hire a designer, I lay out artists, and we fight back and forth about the design and the layout. And then then I take the book to a printer, and I approve the signatures before they start the press runs. And when the book is printed, then I go to the binder in Phoenix, Roswell Book Binding, and I get in line and help glue the covers on. I mean, I'm part of the whole entire process.
So you're an expert on something else. You're an expert on putting a book together.
I'm knowledgeable about it. Yes, that's right.
You know, I'm not sure where I got this, but someone wrote that the urge for you. You told them the urge to collect started at the age of 9 when you found an arrowhead in a plowed field in central Texas. And you still claim it's your most treasured object. And you said, it was a thrill, and that started me on a long journey of adventure and discovery.
That's true. I was 9 years old, and I wrote a book about that called The Secrets of San Lazaro Pueblo. I talk about finding that first arrowhead. I was with my father, and when I picked it up, I told myself, this little projectile is being laying on the ground for 2,000 years waiting for me to come along. Is that not exciting? Mm-hmm. And I picked it up and I looked at my father, and the expression on his face when he saw the expression on my face was something that's burned into my memory. It'll stay there forever. I mean, I wish more fathers would take their sons and daughters and out into the countryside, not necessarily looking for arrowheads, but looking for, roll a log over and see what's under it. I mean, you're going to find ants and grubs and worms and beetles, and make notes. And there's so much to be learned in the mountains and in the desert. Mm. We're too sedentary today.
So yes, you walk outside and there is adventure waiting.
That's right.
Pretty much any direction you go. And I think you said to me, and I don't know if this is a famous quote by you, but you did say to me when I was talking to you earlier, I don't do anything, I just make things happen. Things just happen in your presence, it seems.
I don't know what that is. It's an idiosyncrasy of my biology, I think. But in Vietnam, I flew 328 combat missions, and a lot of them most missions in Vietnam were not very exciting, but it seemed like every time I pulled my gear up, things started happening. And sure, there's exciting things happening everywhere in the mountains and in the desert, and I love to. I'm an avid fly fisherman. When I was a professional fishing guide when I was 13 years old in Yellowstone. But there's a famous quote in the book, a new book on Devine. It says that they never knew that it was the chase they sought and not the quarry. I can't remember how many times I could hardly wait to get out on the river and to fish. And when I get out there, I walk over and sit down under a tree and watch the osprey catch fish. It's not catching the fish that counted. It's being there was what was important to me. And I would urge parents to take their kids out, particularly in the mountains. Summer's here now. The snow's pretty much gone. It's a good time to experience some of those things. Memories that your kids will never forget.
Well, that comes through in your books, the experience of growing up in the West and growing up outside. But we have about 5 minutes, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up your treasure hunt.
Okay.
I think most people know that Forrest has buried a treasure somewhere out here.
I never said I buried it. I hid it.
Hidden, okay. Hidden a treasure. There's maybe a clue, maybe not. That's worth at least $1 million. And what? What's in there?
Well, there are 268 gold coins. There are hundreds of gold nuggets. Two of them are the size of hen's eggs. And there's lots of pre-Columbian gold jewelry and Tirona and a necklace of wonderful quartz fetishes and two little ancient Chinese carved jade figures. It's wonderful.
When did you actually hide this treasure?
Well, I'm 85 years old now. I hid it when I was either 79 or 80. My wife didn't know within 18 months of when I hid that thing. She knew I had it, but she didn't know that I had gone out and hidden it.
Oh, so it was a secret even that you hid it at the time that you hid it.
Yeah, nobody knows that I hid it or where I hid it. I'm the only one in the world that will know that.
So far. And you invite anyone who wants to find it.
Sure. I invite parents to. I've said that it's hidden in the Rocky Mountains north of Santa Fe and below the Canadian border. So I'm inviting people to get their kids and go out looking for it. If you can find it, I guarantee it's worth your while.
So $1 million. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I talked about that in my Thrill of the Chase book. In 1988, I was diagnosed with what everybody said was terminal cancer. It takes a while for that to soak in, but after a couple of weeks, I said, well, if I'm gonna go, who says I can't take it with me? Who says I can't impact the future? And so I decided that, I've had so much fun doing this over the last 70-something years that why not let somebody else have the same opportunity and the same thrill of the chase that I've had? And so I bought this wonderful little cast bronze box. I gave $25,000 for this beautiful little chest that's I don't know how old it is Romanesque. I mean, but I started buying things just to put in it. One, gold nuggets and gold coins and gold is jewel. There's, I think, 270 rubies in there. There's diamonds. There's 2 Ceylon sapphires. There's 8 emeralds, and there's all kinds of gold bracelets and wakas. Printed in gold figures.
We have a few more minutes, but do you have any advice or hints for people who might want to look for the treasure?
Sure. In my book, there's a poem, and there are 9 clues in that poem. I would suggest if you want to find my treasure, read that poem over and over, and then try to follow the clues to the treasure.
And where is that poem? Is that the one on the first page here?
No, it's in the back, toward the back of the book.
Towards the back. Okay, yeah. So you have to get your hands on a copy of The Thrill of the Chase and look for the clues in that poem. And I'm sorry we only have 1 minute, but I'd like to say that, maybe tell us how people can find out more about the treasure. Is there a website?
Well, there's a blog called dalneitzel.com, DalNeitzel.com, and he gets about 40,000 hits a day on that blog. But the blog is dedicated to the treasure story and my books.
And you can buy your book in town here somewhere?
Buy it from Collected Works Bookstore in Santa Fe.
And very quickly, I do want to mention that you are hard at work at some other books, and one particularly about Taos.
Well, I've got a book in my computer called Closet Stories of Taos. It's not an art book, but it's about the artists and the characters like Long John Dunn and Dobelli Price and Mace McHorse and Mabel and Frida Lawrence. And it's a gossip book, but it's very interesting. I bought the estate of Leon Gaspard and the home and everything that was in the home, and there were wonderful diaries and ledgers. And anyway, that's what this book is coming out of that purchase.
So when this comes out, we'll all have a different look at that whole Taos community.
That's right.
Well, Forrest, thank you so much for being with us today. It's lovely to see you.
It's my pleasure, Abigail. Thank you.
And thank you for